in the African American the adoption of foreign methods not related to his African background nor to his political economic realities. And the major problem today in the economic development of black people is the lack of an economic system based on what I call a sound cultural analysis. And I don't mean a cultural analysis that goes on talking about how white folks mistreated us. That is not a cultural analysis, ladies and gentlemen. We got a lot of people here just doing endless research on how white people mistreated black people and getting all fired up over these kind of issues, instead of looking deep into the heart and soul and mentality of black people and looking deep into the character of black people and looking deeply at the organization of money and economy within the black community and using that analysis to create a realistic system. We got a lot of fools here reading Marx and other kinds of people whose analysis is based upon Europeans and who didn't come in with preconceived ideas to impose upon the African situation. And one thing I pointed out again and again and again, you can look at any African society, and whether it is Marxist, socialist, capitalist, or any other kind of ist, it is poor compared to its European people. And that must recognize then that the problem we confront is deeper than subscribing to European doctrines of Adam Smith and Marx. That subscribing to these European doctrines are not the solutions to our problems. Marxist theory is based upon an analysis of European culture, and his economic recommendations are based upon that analysis. And we have some fools here who want to call it scientific, and as if it's somehow universal and above and untouchable. And yet when they look at it in country after country in Africa and other places that have subscribed to it without being realistic about their economic and social position in the world, they can see that it has not benefited very much those nations and those people. And yet they react by holding on even more tenaciously to a philosophy that even the Russians are throwing out, that even the Chinese are throwing aside. And everybody's throwing aside that this Negro, the poorest of all, who is still trying to hold on to it for dear life and is not surviving. Does that mean Marx's ideas are no good? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. Does that mean we can't use it? No, I'm not saying that either. What I am saying, though, is develop your economic and social philosophy based upon your own political and social reality first. Now, you may find, as I have found when I look directly at the heart and soul of our people, that many of your conclusions may coincidentally parallel those of Marx. But the origin is not Marx. The origin is from our own selves. And that means that those ideas are our possession. And we don't have to ask white Marxists or any other group to interpret them for us. Any other group doesn't come into us and say, well, you know, how people started and Marx was a Jew or whatever, and, you know, we have the right to interpret what he meant by this and that. We don't have to deal with that. We can deal with it because we've developed it out of our own hearts and our own soul and our own reality. When I was trying to go into business, it puzzled me for a long time. Where is the black money? Where is it? You know? Black people, we hear again and again, if you look at the collective earnings and resources of black people in America, you have to recognize that they are the 9th or 10th richest nation on this earth. That we trade more with this country than does the whole nation of Canada. That we represent a tremendous amount of wealth. And that the problem then with the black community is not a problem of poverty. but it is the correct utilization of the wealth that we have and the correct development of the wealth that we have as people. It is the malallocation of the money that we have, not the lack of money at all. I was interested in one example he gave here of the Japanese tailor who was selling suits for $35, and he's selling to other poor Japanese who could not pay $35 at one time for a suit. So how do they solve the problem? The tailor's got to stay in business. The other people need a suit. Do they go down to SBA and apply for a loan? They could afford $5 a week, though. So they pull 7 people together. Then the 7 put in their $5, and the first man gets his $35 suit. The tailor gets paid. The other man takes his suit home. And the next week, the next $35 come in, and on it go. And the money revolves, and the wealth revolves, and there's growth and development within the community, you see. Not looking outside of themselves, but looking where? Within themselves. Because ultimately, that is the source of wealth.
Changing our name. We don't have time to talk about Jesse Jackson and his African-American campaign in the New York Times, which feels we're not African-American until the New York Times says we're African-American. I want to read this excerpt from a January 31st, 1989 article in the New York Times. A moment led by Jesse Jackson to call blacks African-Americans has met with both rousing approval and deep-seated skepticism in a debate that is coming to symbolize the role and history of blacks in this country. Even these people recognize that a name is connected to a social role. A name is not just something you call people, but the name and people are called signifies their role. Therefore, a change of name represents a people's attempt to change their role and position in the world. Some Negroes think that to change our name is just some foolish game we're playing. It's not about that. Even other people recognize that. This change of name, if it comes, will be deeply felt, and if what it implies becomes a true part of the African-American personality, it represents fundamental changes in this world. It is not a game we're playing here. Identity is very important, as is the idea that black people would dare to name themselves. Whites recognize that as an incursion on their power of naming and the incursion on their power of domination. History is what comes in, History is what creates a shared identity in the people. It is based on the shared identity that they act collectively. To take away a people's history, to degrade their history, is to degrade their sense of shared identity, is to remove the basis upon which they must behave collectively and reach their goals collectively. This is why the history is rewritten and why people get alarmed about it. When we suffer from social amnesia, we forget the debt we owe to the past and future generations. We then misinterpret our accomplishments as solely our own individual accomplishments. I remind my college student audience that you are not here in this college just because you're smart, because you come from a right family, because you scored high on the SATs and all the other stuff. Blacks have scored high on the SATs since the beginning of time. We've had good families and the right families from the beginning of time. We've had 4.0 students from the beginning. We had all that, and we're still getting kept out of the university. So you're not here because of your own personal achievement. You're here because people who didn't score anything put their bodies and their lives on the line to see that you got here. And you owe it to them, and you owe them something for that. If this institution decides to put you out, it will be those same people who will be up here to see that you get here again. Some of you want to forget that history and then claim you owe them nothing when you make your couple of little bucks in front of a TV camera or some other place. Then not only do you forget them, you forget the ones coming after you, and you don't make sure that they can also get in and their privileges are also maintained. You want to act like the revolution is something that's temporarily and not permanent. It is permanent. You forget your history and forget who you are and lose your obligation to the past, to those who made your successes possible, and do not fulfill your obligations for those to come, some of whom will be your own sons and daughters. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, here continuing my reading of The Falsification of African Consciousness by Amos Wilson, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy. And we're picking up on page 38 at Changing Our Name. And he's talking about the power to change name, the power to change a people's name, or the power to maintain your name, but the history and the social place that comes with the name change, or comes with the name that the people have. Who you are is connected to what you call yourself, right? Names have meanings, and the meanings impact the group of people that wear those names, that bear those names, right? And so he's also talking about the history that is connected to the people in their name, and how when you are able to not only snatch away our history, but change our name, you disconnect us from the history. Now, he's leading off with the changing of the name aspect, because he's getting into how our history is connected to the economics that we are involved in. And, you know, we touched on that last week, but we're going to go more in depth on it this week, of the economics of history, or how history and economics can come together. But since we have not been taught our history in the world, like Black history in the world, Black history from Africa and on out from there, we don't really know that history in mass. And as we covered last week, a lot of Black people are just not interested in learning Black history, which is unfortunate. No, we want to complain about everything that's happening to us, but we don't want to learn the who, what, where, when, why, and how about it. You know, I'm not asking people to have the love of history that I have, but I am saying, well, it would make sense to know what's going on, know what happened in the past, know what's happening right now, so you can have an idea what can happen in the future. As stated last week again, the past, the present, and the future are all connected when we're talking about the African mindset, the African viewpoint. So that's what we're getting into today. What he calls our social amnesia, our historical amnesia. We've forgotten who we are, and we don't care to learn who we are. I said that last week. So now we're going to get into the consequences of not knowing who we are, and the consequences of not caring to learn who we are. Because whether you believe it or not, Dr. Amos Wilson is basically getting at a people's economics, and the economic system that they choose to engage in is connected to the history that they have, and the history that they know, and who they are. So let's get into it. Picking back up on page 40, the bottom paragraph. When we suffer from social amnesia, we identify with abstractions. I am not Black. I am not African. I am a human being. I am an American. Sterile, abstract identity. The closer we get to it, the less we see of it, and the more we recognize that it has no meaning. What is it? Who is it? What does it stand for? What does it mean? It's empty, and people who identify themselves with these abstractions are also empty and experience their lives as empty, as people who have no feelings. They identify with the abstraction so as to escape feelings. Therefore, we see them detached and cut off from themselves as persons, as well as from their people. In fact, they use their abstract identity to escape their responsibilities to their own people, and to escape the pain and struggle that happens today to be a part of our situation. I love the challenge of being African in today's world. It's wonderful. I love digging in my heels against the impossible odds of being Black in America. What greater challenge could we have in life today than to be African? What greater testament to our heroism than to overcome the problems that face us today? What greater opportunity can we have to transform ourselves and transform the world in the process? Why would we wish to escape this kind of challenge? It is too wonderful, too magnificent. We should eat this kind of challenge for breakfast. When we become socially amnesic, we forget our location in time and space, because history is about locating oneself in time and space. History is a grid, a set of coordinates that permit the individual to locate himself in reference to other points in the world. History is a mathematical concept. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a geometrical concept. It locates and positions one relative to other things. It tells us who we are, what we are, how we are, when we are, right? History is not something that we should look at as an obligation, especially when it comes in the academic field. We're obligated to learn our history. No, but a part of that is, once again, us not knowing our history and us not caring to know our history. So the children don't care to know the history because the adults never cared to know the history. So there's no will to make sure that we put the time in to learn the history, right? So we're going to continue to repeat the patterns of history, like we talked about in the first video, Reconstruction. We're believing that the achievements that we have today are brand new, not understanding that our ancestors had these same achievements. But the social amnesia, we're cut off from the knowledge of ourselves. We're cut off from the knowledge of how we can be strong, of how we can be powerful, of how we can thrive as African people all around the globe. We're cut off from that because we have no idea who we are en masse. Now, you watching this, you may know who you are. And if you're like me, you study your history vigorously. But en masse, we don't know who we are, and that hurts us. History and the manipulation of time. When one is shorn of one's past and does not see the direction of one's future and is very uncertain of one's present, then one cannot tell from whence one comes and where one is going, where one is, and suffers as a result. Let me quickly read in the context of history as a time dimension from a little piece done in the Omni magazine in February of 1984. It's called Timeless Minds. It reads, When I wake you, the past will be gone. Dr. Bernard Aronson of the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute told deeply hypnotized college student, when the post-hypnotic suggestion took hold, the student became drowsy and infantile, losing both memory and the powers of speech. What happens when you lose your memory? The hypnotist had given the student the post-hypnotic suggestion. When I wake you, the past will be gone. He then woke the student. The student reported how he felt. He exhibited infantile behavior, losing both memory and powers of speech. Later, he reported a vague sense of meaningless. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's the meaning of life? Those kinds of querying and issues, a loss of history, a loss of his past was created within the student. The young man without a past was one of the 10 college students who took part in an unusual experiment with psychological time and with psychological time warp. So there was a manipulation of time. A manipulation of an individual's past is a manipulation of his time dimension, a warping of his time, which warps his perception, warps his experience and perception of himself. People who play with our history are playing with our sense of time, playing with our sense of place and who we are and what we're about. So is history just an elective? No, ladies and gentlemen. Aronson gave some subjects post-hypnotic suggestions that eliminated their past, present, and future. He gave others a vastly expanded past, present, and future. These consequences were profound. With no future, people feel a loss of identity and a euphoric mystical sensation, free of both anxiety and motivation. One student found himself in a boundless, imminent present, expanding the future, on the other hand, canceling all fears of death and induced serenity, contemplation, and the feeling of self-fulfillment. Being robbed of a past brought on a semi-infantile torpid state, and the students with a dilated past became egocentric and inhibited. You behave like you become childlike when you don't know your past. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? You become childlike. But basically, You are stripped of your abilities to even go about who you are and what you are when you don't know your past. And you can be reprogrammed with anything that could be to your detriment. That's what, think about it. We have to program ourselves properly as African people in the globe, as Black people, as African people. We don't need a white mindset or a white mode or a white economic system or white programming to exist. We have so much history to show that Black people can exist and Black people can thrive, and Black people can not only thrive but excel with an African mindset, with an African viewpoint. But under the Eurocentric viewpoint, we see that leads us to oppression, depression, suppression, and repression. We cannot reach our fullest potential with the European mindset, with the European systems that we are engaging in. So that programming has to be changed. That's where us learning our history comes in. Canceling the present was the most disturbing, however. One subject turned catatonic, others became severely depressed and almost schizophrenic. Stopping subjective time altogether produced an entire sensation of death. The world moves on, but I don't, one student observed. Aronson's conclusion: life must carry some sense of direction, from past to present or present to future, to seem worth living. People giving a present showing of a past and future become preoccupied with death and behave like schizophrenics. What are we saying here? The hypnotist, by manipulating the man's attitude toward his past, manipulated his consciousness, real capacities and abilities. He just wasn't in a state of illusion. He had a memory problem. He had problems getting meanings out of life. He lost his sense of purpose in life. He became lethargic, drowsy, and sleepy. Sounds familiar? People who manipulate their past and present manipulate one's mentality, sanity, contact with reality, and the ability to deal with reality. In other words, the manipulation of history creates real effects in the individual's personality. Our history not being taught to us correctly ensures that our potential will be forever undeveloped as a people, and that we will not challenge those who rule over us due to the programming that we have. Our history not being taught to us correctly ensures that our potential will be forever undeveloped and as a people, and that we will not challenge those who rule over us. Arrested development. Professor Carl Tone Jones talks about it all the time. Black Americans having arrested development. It's the psychological and mental state that we currently exist in due to the program. That's why we have to learn our history to input a new program. Intellectual structures and powers are underdeveloped when we suffer from amnesia. They are restricted and alienated. Some of my Black students say, hey, I know nothing about Black history, but I know math, I know computer science, and I know this and that. So apparently it didn't do me much harm. Oh no, don't deceive yourself. Being cut off from your past only means that you have gained knowledge at the cost of being alienated. You have gained an alienated knowledge. Alienated knowledge can only be used in the interest of aliens. Look at who you work for. For once, you know computer science and don't know your history. That one of the unwritten rules. They will teach you math and science and so forth to the degree that you will forget what and who you are, your history, and forget your connectedness with your people. Because it is only when you are unconnected that you can be of use to aliens. You cannot use alienated knowledge for yourself. Knowledge must be connected and contained in a historical structure, in a cultural structure. If it is to work for a particular people. That is why you can get degrees in business administration and build no business. You can be the CEO of Xerox, yet you won't build your own. And that's that mental constraint. It's that mental block, that mental hole that we have. Like the example that Dr. Amos Wilson used. Yes, I know history, I know math. I gained these skills and I know this information from going to school. I don't know a lick of Black history, and I am successful within the white man's world. Now, if you add your knowledge of self, you will be successful in your own world. To know your history is to help to increase your economics and protect your economics. Now we're going to history and wealth creation. Our resources are pillaged and our creativity is regraded when we become socially amnesic. We forget coping skills that we've learned in the past, and that yet we can still be useful in the present. If we forget everything we've learned in the past, what babbling babies would we become? If we forget everything we've learned in the past, we would not know how to cope with many of the problems and issues that confront us as we move through life. We can't drop our past. That's where we learned our coping skills. Let me give a quick example of what it really means. Let's look at economics. African Americans earn $300 billion per year spending money, which would make us the 9th or 10th richest nation on earth. Yet we perceive ourselves as poor. And that's potential. That's the money we spend, which could be potential wealth and potential power for us if we aggregate our wealth. But because our wealth is not aggregated, it's just potential power. A group that can only spend money can only support other people's. Harlem's 125th Street now contains 68 Korean businesses and 68 growing fast. But I don't see Koreans walking up and down these blocks spending any money at all. In fact, I hardly see any other ethnic group on that street. I only see African people. Even Hispanics are not in it, are not on it to any, even Hispanics are not on it to any great degree. Yet we enrich the Koreans and other ethnic groups, support them, feed their children while I starve and die, become addicted to crack, rob and steal, and do the kinds of things we do not approve of. This is a result of a people who have forgotten their history. We say, well, if we had the money, it's not the money. We are not suffering from a lack of money. This is Dr. Amos Wilson's thoughts, right? No way. Over 500 billion earned and created by blacks between New York and Newark. So we're not suffering from any great money problems. We're suffering from the absence of an economic system. Now that I agree with. The money amount that he's talking at this time, of course, has increased because we're in the trillions now, but just using the 500 billion figure. So to be able to spend 500 billion means you have money, but to still be poor means your economic system either don't exist or don't work. Money is not a system. Money is what it is. A system involves a systematic and organized utilization of money, a systematic utilization and distribution of money. Without the pattern, without the system, without the organization, one does not have an economy. An economy exists prior to money. There were economies in the world before money was invented. We didn't even have to have money to live in an economic system. So ultimately, when we study economic systems, we recognize that an economic system at its base refers to the nature of the relationship between people. It is the systematic way people choose to relate one to the other that makes the economic system, not money. When we lack a systematic way of relating to each other, then we can have money and still be poor, have money and be robbed, which is what we are. So we have money, but the way we go about earning, keeping, and spending our money is detrimental to us as a people because it is not designed for us to organize our wealth. It's designed for us to exist as individuals and not organize our wealth. And because we exist as individuals, there is no economic system. And I've studied economic systems myself. And before there was actual money, there's always been some forms of currency that existed within the system. There's always been rich and poor. Economic systems support the money. The money is a result of the economic system. The economic system gives the money its value and its purpose. We can replace money with cowrie shells. We could replace dollars with shoestrings. It's the system, not the money, because the money could be whatever we give value to that we say is his money. If we take a pack of shoestrings and say this is $100, then now this pack of shoestrings is $100 because of the value and the ideas that we've placed upon these shoestrings that become money. But that comes from the economic system. So the economics of maladjustment. Why do we suffer from this problem then? Why is the Black personality created? I tried to get across the fact that every maladjusted characteristic in the Black personality serves an economic function. Each maladaptive characteristic is not there by accident. It's not there simply because Europeans hate us. It's there because it maintains their economic dominance. If I've got money, I can help you. But if I distrust you, I won't help you, and you will not make it. So it's not the absence of money. It's the presence of mistrust. If I will not cooperate, if you cannot rely on me, then we cannot have an economic system, even though we may have money. In other words, a people must trust, be reliable and dependable, have respect for each other if they are to develop a viable economic system, which we do not have. As Black Americans, we don't trust each other. When they have those kinds of relationships, they have a special system, and they can build and they can grow economically. Suspiciousness and other negatives are implanted in the collective Black personality, so that African people cannot challenge European people, even though we are the majority of the people on this earth, and we live over the riches of this earth. And people who do not share history, who do not appreciate the shared experiences that their history represents, or people who cannot utilize mutual trust, dependability, and so forth, upon which to build an economic social system. African people who forget their history are people who forget that they had an economy before the European came into existence. They are a people who forget that their economy was developed and maintained prior to European imperial ascendancy. So he's getting, one of the main points in this that he's getting at is the mistrust that was developed into the African American psyche, into the Black American psyche, into the FBA or ADOS psyche, whatever word you want to use for us, right? We don't, en masse, we don't trust each other. Even in critical mass, the distrust permeates every member. And the organization does not form. The organization doesn't happen, it falls apart, and Black people, once again, are operating economically as individuals rather than groups. When we can operate as groups, we can empower ourselves and we don't need outside help. But the distrust that we've developed over the centuries, that has been nurtured over the centuries, is not going away anytime soon until the programming is changed. When Samuel Nancy needed $35 to open his Joy de Vere bar here, he did not bother with banks. Instead, he turned to the Tontines, an informal credit system rooted in African tradition. Without signing a paper or filling out a form, Mr. Nancy emerged from his monthly Tontine meeting with $35,000 in cash. A collective economic system where people trust each other. I tell people there's no such thing as a Black bank. There's not a Black bank in existence. There's no such animal, whether Freedom, National, Carver, etc. None of them are Black banks. Anytime you have a bank regulated by another people and by another people's rules, it's not yours. You're just there. On another occasion, I'll show you where the presence of Black banks have retarded Black economic development and not advanced it. Other groups will have moved into economic existence and control before they even build a bank. I'm gonna read that again. Other groups will have moved into economic existence and control before they even build a bank. After they build an economic base, then you see them build a bank, not the other way around. But dominated people, us, the us's and we's, dominated people who don't know themselves do it backwards. They build a bank and don't even have anything to invest in, ignoring the fact that banks make money by loans and investments. That's why Black banks have suffered. We have to build basic economics mom and pop base first. It is through lending people money this way and so forth that a banking system grows, not the other way around. But the Negro starts with the bank first because it makes him look good. It retards us and then puts us under the rule of another people. They tell us that we can do only this and that the other thing with our money. Let us use our money under our own rules and regulations. I'm just saying, if we build something for ourselves, creating that economic base. So he goes on to talk about the Tontines. And those are basically, if you don't know what the Tontines is I think they call it a susu here in Black America. I think we call it a susu or something like that. But basically, let's say 7 to 10 to 20 people get together and they place their money in the pot. Every month, they put a specific amount of money in the pot. And every month, so let's say if it's 12 people putting $1,000 in this pot a month. These 12 people putting these $1,000 in this pot a month will generate, $12,000 a month. So whoever needs the money, whenever your time comes up, because there's 12 people, 12 months, $12,000 a month. So everybody will have access to $12,000 a month to do what they need to do with their businesses. And there's no like actual legal contracts, there are social contracts. And if you don't uphold your part of the bargain, then socially you will be exiled. You'll be kicked out. Socially, you will be nobody. You'll be forgotten. And that social degradation is what will hold people accountable to make sure that they pay back the loans. But you're going to pay back the loans because you're putting your money back into the pot every month. Basically, what Dr. Wilson is getting at, like he said, like I read, is create your economic base first, then create the bank. The money doesn't matter if the economic base isn't sound, isn't created. If you don't have an economic base at all, you don't have an economic system at all, you're not even generating money or creating money. You're earning money from those that you work for, not even generating for yourself. Even if you do have your own business, there's no economic base for you to exist in, for you to operate in. So you are still existing within the white people system because we don't have our own system. So like you said, if you need a loan, you have to go to a white bank or even a black bank that follow white rules instead of being able to go to the Tontine or to your economic system to be able to get the loan, get the money you need to create the business, start the business, or continue the business. Create something for ourselves economically. We have to create an economic base, but we have to see ourselves as a people who can do that, trust ourselves, get together, unify, aggregate our wealth, aggregate our knowledge, aggregate our abilities, aggregate, work together. The programming has to change for that to happen. If we get back into our history, get back into our tradition, we'll make money. If I'm not African who tells, I'm not an African who tells us to identify with poverty. I think that the more we identify with our African tradition, the richer we're going to become as a people. I'm not here to sell poverty as a virtue. I'm not here to assert the poverty-stricken and welfare-laden people are somehow more virtuous and righteous than the people who are making a decent living. That's not my style. We can't say that we are poor and our nations are suffering as a result of our wealth being stolen. When if we take that wealth back, we won't be richer. How's it taking back what belongs to us going to keep us poor? A sure sign then of getting back to one's African self is becoming wealthier. Ladies and gentlemen, does that frighten us? Has the world so convinced us that Black people were destined to be poor? Some of us have that thought, and that's why many of us are frightened of money and wealth. And that has been inculcated into us by religious churches, and the very ones inculcating it in us are living quite well. Amnesia means an undiscovered self, an emptiness, a self incapable of self-understanding, incapable of understanding its own motivations, a self incapable of self-direction and self-determination, a reactionary self, a self that does not understand others or the world in which it exists, a fatalistic, externalized self. To rediscover one's history is not only an act of self-discovery, it is an act of self-creation, a reconstruction from the dead, a tearing away of the veil, a revelation of the mystery. To discover our history is to discover our somethingness before something else created us. To come to know ourselves as we were prior to our recreation by aliens means we will be in charge of our own becoming, the creators of our own consciousness, the creation of ourselves as namers of the world, the namers of ourselves, which gives us the power of self-determination and self-direction. We can do it, we can do it, we can do it. But it is a responsibility that comes with empowering yourself and being self-determined, autonomous, not having to lean on your oppressor. So I read from page 38 to page 53. I've read through page 53. So I'm going to pick back up on page 54. Probably read from 54 to I'll read from 54 to 60 because it's just a little short little end part of part 1. I read from 54 to 60, then kind of pick back up and go a little further because I want to keep it succinct. But our history is important. What we call ourselves is important. How we think about ourselves is important. What we know about ourselves is important. How we go about moving as individuals and as a group is important. How we go about building our lives and constructing our lives and maintaining our lives is important. To be a people in this world is more than just being people who just exist. It's having purpose as people, as a group, as a nation, having purpose, having a will, having goals, have things that we should complete as a group of people to strengthen who we are as a people, to strengthen our place in the world, to stand on our history and ensure that we have a bright and prosperous future in this world and not continue to be on the bottom. The past, the present, and the future, it all matters. We're not talking about the past to concentrate on the past. We're learning the past to understand the past, to help understand the present, to help shape the future. I'm Joseph Ward. This is the Falsification of African Consciousness, Your Essential History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy by Dr. Amos N. Wilson. This book is in the link in the description where you can get the other books that are the book list link for all the books that we reviewed. So this book is also on that list. So make sure you click that to get your copy of it if you don't already have it. And if you have it, let's get to reading and let's do what we do. I love you all and catch y'all on the other side.